There are a lot of discussions on the developments which are going on in Afghanistan nowadays. The Taliban's takeover, the way it has happened and proceeded was kind of shocking for the entire world. Now the experts, the politicians, and the governments are slowly but surely are coming out of the shock, and now they trying to figure out how to deal with the new de facto leadership of Afghanistan, with the Taliban, who just announced yesterday the hardline government, not very much the one that was expected by our European and US friends. There were these reactions coming from the countries in the region and outside of the region. So we will go in these discussions country by country, state by state, with their views, where they stand for the developments and the Taliban's takeover. And we start with Iran. So we have the pleasure and have the honor to have today with us the very, very much welcomed expert and senior fellow and director of the Iran program at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C., Mr. Alex Vatanka. He specializes in the Middle Eastern regional security affairs with a particular focus on Iran. He was formerly a senior analyst at Jane's Information Group in London. Alex is also a senior fellow in Middle East Studies at the U.S. Air Force Special Operations School. He has testified before the U.S. Congress. He is actually born in Tehran. He speaks fluent in Farsi and Danish. And he has the master's degree in the international relations from the Essex University. So I will stop here. They're just the only organizational issues. Alex will give us the introductory remarks, and then you will be able to put the questions in there is a special chat regime, or you can raise your hand. So without further ado, dear Alex Vatanka, please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Alex, for that very kind introduction. It's great to be back and to be with you for this panel on a topic that, as you pointed out, Alex, is hugely timely and important. So I look forward to it. And I should say good morning from Washington. I will be brief. I will try and stick to no more than 10 minutes, hopefully. And I just wanted to sort of give you a sense of what I see being Iranian reaction so far in terms of the events that have happened in Afghanistan the last 3 weeks to a month, and the takeover by Taliban. So I will go through a set of observations, and then I'll talk very briefly about Iranian concerns in terms of immediate concerns to Iranian national interest. But I also wanted to sort of touch on the issue of what events in Afghanistan might mean for the geopolitical landscape in terms of countries jockeying to maximize influence in the country of Afghanistan. As we all know, and as history teaches us, civil wars in Afghanistan or instability in Afghanistan has a way of bringing outside parties into the country. In fact, they are oftentimes critical players to fuel the conflict and instability in Afghanistan. So I'd like to say a few words about that as well. But let me just start off immediate reaction here that I can tell in Tehran. The initial reaction was not a surprise. It reflects this sort of knee-jerk reaction that is often the case when it comes to Islamic Republic taking a position on any issue that involves the United States. So the initial reaction in Tehran was to paint the US withdrawal, and I have to say the US withdrawal, the way it was done, to put it very mildly, not well managed. I don't think anybody would dispute that. This was, as far as the optics are concerned, as far as this was managed as an exit, this could have been done much, and should have been done much better. And the Iranian authorities in Tehran took this as an opportunity to say to the Iranian masses, to the Muslim public opinion, that this is what you can expect from the Americans. They spent 20 years in Afghanistan, and they fled in the middle of the night, and they left all their allies behind, couldn't care less about their fate. Obviously, this is a mischaracterization of American intentions, but nonetheless, there was enough there to be able to put that charge, level that charge against Washington, and Iran did. And Iran, I think, does so almost automatically because it wants to engage in that rhetorical fight with the United States when the opportunities present themselves. Never mind the fact that Iran had no reason to be happy about the way things are turning out in Afghanistan. Never mind the fact that US presence in Afghanistan over the last 20 years has been a major plus positive for Islamic Republic. The United States being in Afghanistan, for example, meant that security in Afghanistan increased. As a result, the flow of refugees and Afghan migrants to Iran decreased. We should remember there are about 3 to 4 million Afghan refugees and illegal migrants that are in Iran. The US presence in Afghanistan was a factor that prevented further flow of Afghan migrants, which Iran at the moment, because Iran is under sanctions, is not in a position to deal with. They don't have the financial resources. And that's a major factor that Tehran seemingly forgot. And I could go on. The flow of drugs decreased after the United States became a military political force on the ground. Afghanistan became one of Iran's major trading partners, or at least an export market. Iranian influence in certain pockets of Afghan society, for example, the Shia minority Hazara, the Tajik speakers in the north, the Uzbek, increased because Iran was able to bring finances and cultivate Afghan, certain Afghan demographics and sort of, if you will, spread Iranian soft influence. These are all pluses. These are all pluses that benefited Iranian national interest for the last 20 years. But instead, the Islamic Republic chose to say, or chose to play politics and use this American exit for propaganda purposes. But it didn't last long. I would say it lasted less than a week. So within a week of Taliban taking over Kabul, Iran went from being somewhat, at least officially, happy because the Americans got a bloody nose, to an Iranian state media that openly is now expressing fear. And as Alex, you mentioned, that the Taliban government has just been announced is hardly the kind of government the Iranians wanted to see. It's dominated by the Pashtun. It's dominated by figures that are part of the inner circle of the Taliban movement's leadership. There's no Hazara, there are no Tajiks. As far as I know, there are no women. So basically what Iran has woken up to, once it played its propaganda against the United States, is to fear that it's actually in a position, if things go the wrong way from Tehran's perspective, for Iran to be one of the major losers of recent events in Afghanistan. So I do want to say one final point. Iran is not alone in playing this game or adopting a position where propaganda seems to be the primary concern, as opposed to having a cold, hard look at what is actually going on in Afghanistan and what actually it means for Iranian national interest. I would say the Russians the Chinese, to some extent, are also playing the same exact, war of words and propaganda with the United States. I think this shows, at least to me, that those countries out there in the world that have this anti-American component as part of their worldview, and Iran certainly is top of that list, and the Russians and Chinese not far behind, that yes, they've been joyful, but it will be a joy that might not last that long. And in fact, there are many in the Middle East, including in Iran, that have developed on this line of thinking and articulated what I think is essentially a conspiracy theory, which is to say, listen, the Americans are smarter than this. If they left the way they did, if they left their allies behind, if they left billions of dollars worth of weapons behind, if they cut deals with the Taliban behind the scenes, then there's a reason for it. And that reason is the Americans ultimately want Afghanistan to return to a state of civil war, and Washington's intention is to drag the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, the Pakistanis into the civil war and basically turn it into some sort of a quagmire for them. Again, one could make all sorts of theories. I don't think this is what America intended to do. I see why people want to think that way, because the exit was so badly handled by the US, by the Biden administration. They really botched it. I mean, there's no two ways about it. The way they did it was disastrous, and it really reflects badly in the United States, even though the argument that the US needed to pull out of Afghanistan eventually is a solid argument. So I would also say, Alex, that watch out for those conspiracy theories, that people are looking for a way to justify what America did and why they did it. But I would just urge people to maybe take a second and consider the fact that it was just badly planned policy, as opposed to, something that has an ulterior motive behind it. Let me just mention a couple of other points, Alex, then I think I want to turn back to you. I mentioned the flow of refugees. This could become a real problem for Iran, depending what happens in Afghanistan. There are two countries that historically have received the bulk of Afghan refugees, Pakistan and Iran. Last time Iran received a large number of Afghan refugees was in the 1980s, during the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, and in the 1990s when the Taliban just took over. Iran was not economically that much better off to provide help then. In the 80s, certainly Iran was busy with the Iran-Iraq war, but little capacity to engage in, humanitarian operations to help the Afghans. Today, Iran is the most sanctioned country on earth. They have an extremely angry Iranian public that is upset about how the ruling authorities in Tehran are conducting their foreign policy. And long story short, with less money and resources at their disposal, the big question is, if there is a big wave of group of Afghan migrants, refugees coming to Iran, what would Iran be able to do with them? Because as I said, the resources are so much more limited than they have been before. Could it create internal instability in Iran? Because this time around, the numbers of migrants could be greater. I think I should remind everyone that 20 years ago, when the United States went into Afghanistan, that country's population, Afghanistan, had a population about 20 million. Today, that figure is almost double, about 40 million. So the flow of people going west to Iran, and many I'm sure will be going in the hope that they can go to Turkey, and from Turkey onwards to Europe. And we've seen already this is not a new trend. This is a trend that is already very much firmly in place. The flow of migrants is not a new phenomenon. The point I'm making is it could just intensify. And by the way, countries elsewhere in the South Caucasus, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia. I mean, they will not be immune should there be a large exodus of Afghan migrants. And this obviously all depends on how the Taliban is able or not to manage the politics in Kabul. But I think most of us would agree what we have seen so far from Taliban has not been very reassuring. I think the Taliban seems to play the game of the media, public relations, pretending or wanting to pretend that they are very different from the dark force that Taliban was in the 1990s, but in reality, they haven't changed. They have now a supreme leader who will not be elected by the Afghan people. They have an inner circle. They will decide and define what the Islamic Emirate will come to mean. And again, right now, that suggests a good part of Afghan population will be sidelined, marginalized, and will want to fight for their rights, for their future in that country. And again, if it's not managed, we will end up with another round of Afghan civil war, God forbid, but that is a real distinct likelihood. And one final point about Afghan society. I've visited Afghanistan twice over the years, and each time I went, I could see the difference by Afghanistan being a priority for the international community. And it wasn't just a flow of cash. It wasn't just that militaries from the Western world, from countries like Georgia, were on the ground helping with security. All that mattered, but ultimately what also mattered more than anything else, that they were part of the world community. They wasn't forgotten. They weren't forgotten. And you know, certainly the youth in Afghanistan are now fearing that they will be forgotten and they will be left to their own devices. And that's what they fear the most. Some will look to outside world for help. I'm sure there'll be Afghan groups of Afghans that will again look to Iran. Others will look to Pakistan, maybe the Gulf states, to the Central Asian states for help should it come to the return of God forbid, but if civil war should return, then neighboring states will be sucked in, if you will, and Iran will be one of the ones that will be sucked in. And they just don't right now have much of a bandwidth to intervene in Afghanistan, but they have no choice. And in turn, that will potentially result in instability inside of Iran itself in a worst case scenario. So Alex, I feel I'm giving you a very dark picture. But I wish I had good news. And the only thing I can be hopeful about is, and that will be my last remark, that countries that do have sway over this Taliban, and I think we all know who those countries are. It's Pakistan, it's Qatar, increasingly it's China, that those countries are open to pressure from the West and also from countries like Iran, Russia, India, that, you need to pressure Taliban to tell them to make compromises. Because if they fail to make compromises, the country is going to be heading for civil war, and that's not in anyone's interest. So, Alex, that is my most optimistic take on it, and I'll stop here.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex, very much for your very, very in-depth overview of the developments in Afghanistan and the future developments in Afghanistan. I absolutely agree with you that in the first weeks, the Iranian leadership stick to neutrality. They welcome the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, and the President Raisi expressed his hope that it will give the chance to peaceful, stable, and secure life starting in Afghanistan. But after latest developments, especially in Panjshir, Valley. I saw in the news that the foreign minister's spokesman, Iranian foreign minister spokesman, Saeed Khatibzadeh, has harshly criticized and condemned the attack on the resistance forces in Panjshir Valley, and indicated also the unacceptance and concern regarding the meddling of the outside forces and the country, meaning I think Pakistan, in this operation against the resistance forces. If this the resistance goes led by Ahmad Massoud, and if these protests continue and grow in what we see today, yesterday, in these days, in Kabul, in the regional the cities, the women are going out protesting and supporting the resistance movement. Should we expect that Iran could provide some assistance to the resistance movement in Panjshir Valley or wherever they move to? This is my first question. Second is related to the economy. You mentioned very rightly that there was a good trade relationship between Afghanistan and Iran. And Iran had a project intention of developing the Chabahar port and the project of the corridor with the participation of Afghanistan and India especially, and Uzbekistan. Looking at the reactions from the Iran's Secretary of Supreme National Security Council, Ali Shamkhani, who said that the friends of Afghanistan are concerned that there is no inclusive government in Afghanistan. Should we expect that further worsening of relationship between Iran and Afghanistan? And should we expect that it will somehow make it problem for Iran special units to recruit the Shia fighters for their militias for fighting in Syria and other places? There are three different questions, and I hope there will be more coming from our participants.
Oh, thank you. Look, in terms of Iran's ability to become a sponsor of certain Afghan groups, history teaches us that Iran has a long track record doing this, particularly with during the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. Iran had a number of Afghan, mostly Shia, resistant groups that were either based in Iran in places like Mashhad, certainly had the political and to some extent financial support of the Iranians. That can be reactivated. In recent weeks, someone like Ismail Khan, the big political heavyweight of Western Afghanistan and Herat, we all remember when we saw the photo of him greeting the Taliban fighters and announcing that he had joined the Taliban, that this was frankly a shock to a lot of us. But then very quickly we realized, well, clearly political deals have been made by the Taliban and various political figures around Afghanistan, which incidentally shows us that this was an intelligence failure, that the world should have known that the Taliban had been busy in recent months, if not years, cutting deals with various figures. But that's how we got to where we are, the Taliban taking Kabul without really firing many bullets. Question now is, can Taliban maintain its position in Kabul or in Herat or in Kandahar or in Mazar-e-Sharif? That comes down to how good they will be at playing politics going forward at maintaining the partnerships or deals that they reached with the likes of Ismail Khan. If they cannot, and it's not at all unrealistic to expect that perhaps the deal that was reached with, say, someone like Ismail Khan will not last. Well, then who would the Ismail Khans of Afghanistan look to for support? Again, history shows us they will look to neighboring states, Pakistan, Iran, Tajikistan. This time Iran could increasingly play a different role, maybe backed by the Russians, obviously. How would Iran do it? Historically, what the Iranians have done is provide sanctuary, training, arms. The Revolutionary Guards of Iran, if you remember, the head of Revolutionary Guards, Quds Force, the expeditionary force, whose head was assassinated in, Qasem Soleimani was assassinated in 2020. He really made an, he didn't make a name for himself in Afghanistan. He made a name for himself later in Iraq, but he was really learning, if you will, the job of raising militiamen in Afghanistan in the 1990s. Would Iranian Revolutionary Guards, if forced to, be able to recruit, arm, and deploy Afghans, Shia, Tajik, whoever wants to join the anti-Taliban movement? I have no doubt they can. I mean, there is already the Fatimiyun, the brigade of Fatimiyun that has been fighting over the last few years in Syria primarily, but also to some extent in Iraq. Fatimiyun is made up of Afghan Shia. So if Iran can recruit Afghan Shia to go and fight on an Iranian command in Syria and Iraq, I would assume it's easy for Iran to then turn Fatimiyun and say, go home to Afghanistan where they come from and fight for your families. So yes, definitely the answer to that, Alex, is I can see Iran being able to do that. As I said, how much it can spend on it, it's less than if Iran wasn't sanctioned. Iran is sanctioned, it doesn't have that much money, but this sort of operation doesn't necessarily require that much money either. I mean, we're not talking about large-scale military intervention. We're talking about recruiting men. You're paying them. I mean, in the case of Syria, the amount is reportedly between $500, $600, $700 a month salary. You feed them, you arm them. Iran produces its own small arms, so it doesn't have to go to the arms market to buy arms to be involved in supporting the Afghan anti-Taliban movement if it decided that it had to. Sorry, I'm being a bit long-winded with this answer, but it's got so many different aspects to it. So yes, the short answer, yes, I could see that happening if things in Afghanistan go south and Iran felt it needed to.
And sorry for jumping in here. Yeah. Sorry for jumping in here. There is a question about the Taliban-Hazaras relations. Could we expect warming of Taliban-Hazar relations as the Taliban pretend that they are different? They are not going to make. They are not going to have the same approach toward Hazars that they had before and make the same mistakes. Do you expect that there could be, we already see that there are no Hazars in, excuse me, in the government. Yeah. Do you expect that they will consider having normalized relations with Hazars?
I mean, that was one of the conditions, certainly, by the Iranians when they met repeatedly with Taliban leadership. That was one of their conditions, that you have to treat your Shia minority, which is anywhere between 15 and 20% of Afghanistan's population. You have to treat them decently. And the Taliban has done so far. I mean, I haven't seen any reports of indiscriminate attacks, violence against the Shia simply because they're Shia. This is exactly what ISIS, Islamic State, has done in Afghanistan. It has targeted the Shia. The most radical Sunni extremists They believe the Shia are the biggest enemy, and they consider them enemy that has to go even before Jews and Christians. Taliban is not saying that. That's what Taliban did in the 1990s. And, you know, time will show, because we talk about Taliban as if it's one uniform entity. I am certainly no expert on how Taliban works inside out, but I can say probably pretty confidently that it's a movement with different factions within it. The Doha Taliban leadership based in Qatar, one has to assume, has a different take on things than the Taliban commanders on the ground in Afghanistan who were doing the fighting. So who has the upper hand in the Taliban movement going forward? That's another big unknown. If they decide that, you know, they want to go back to the bad ways of targeting minorities just because they're minorities, well, then again, that does not suggest to me that we can expect normalized relations between Hazara community and the Taliban. Although there are reports that, you know, Tajik, Hazara, Uzbek, some have joined the Taliban. I think there is fundamentally a desire across the Afghan nation that, you know, they need to get together, that they need some kind of national unity. If Taliban is the best chance for that, then it deserves a bit of space and time to prove its goodwill and credentials. As I said before, Alex, I haven't seen anything to make me optimistic, but it's still early days. Maybe Taliban will be more inclusive. Maybe they have learned their lessons. Maybe outside powers like Pakistan and Qatar and, as I said, China might pressure them to act differently for the sake of being able to stay in power and prevent a civil war. Time will show. But one other point I'll make about the issue of sectarianism. In the 1990s, when Taliban came to power and they went after the Shia with full force, well, 1990s, one could argue, cannot be repeated today for one simple reality. In the last, I would say, certainly since the invasion of Iraq in 2003 and the Arab Spring that unfolded in 2011, individual countries like Iraq, like Syria, like Yemen, but across the region has experienced the destructiveness of sectarianism in a way we hadn't seen in the 1990s. And countries that, let's go with Pakistan. Pakistan has a significant Shia minority. Pakistani Shia are a significant minority. I don't know. Nobody really knows the figure, but they could be somewhere between 40 million. Many Pakistani Shia are in the armed forces of Pakistan. Pakistan does not want to see the Shia-Sunni tensions come in inside Pakistani borders and undermine Pakistan's internal stability. That's why, in the reasons Pakistan never decided never to join the Saudi call for Pakistan to help them in Yemen, because Pakistan said that conflict in Yemen has a sectarian dimension to it. We can't take part in anything like that. So my hope is that the region has moved beyond the days of the 1990s where, you know, we just didn't know how bad things can get once you choose to fight a political fight using religious arguments. And I hope that Pakistan, Iran, the Gulf states, I hope everyone, and including Taliban, would appreciate that this is a fire that if you start it, it will consume all. And it's better left alone. And if they decide to adopt that position, then logically you have to assume that they won't be going after the Hazaras or other minorities the way they did in the 1990s. Now, Alex, you had two other questions. One was on the economy and the proxies. I think I answered a good part of what you maybe had in mind on the issue of the proxies, but let me turn to the economy very quickly. Because of sanctions that Iran is under, because it can't sell to traditional large markets in Japan, in South Korea, in India, in Europe, because it cannot do that for various reasons. Banks don't facilitate transactions. Insurance companies don't insure Iranian oil tankers. That makes selling oil difficult. And I can go on, the list is long. So what you end up with here is your neighboring states are so much more interesting for you from an economic point of view if you're Iran. That's why today, Iran's top 5 trading partners, 4 of them are immediate neighbors that Iran shares land borders with: Iraq, Turkey, Afghanistan, and UAE. I lied, Iran does not share a land border with UAE, but it's a neighboring state. So it's a neighbor. And then the last one is China, which continues to buy Iranian oil. Sanctions meant that you were better off putting whatever it is you're trying to sell in the back of a truck and ship it over. And that's exactly what Afghanistan has been doing as an importer of Iranian-made goods. The figure is not, if I remember, the figure is around a $5 billion per year. Remember, before sanctions on Iran, Iran's annual foreign trade was around $100 billion plus. So 5 billion is not, it's not the end of the Iranian economy by any means, but in the state of sanctions, it was significant. And it's very likely that it might lose a good part, if not all of that trade, particularly if Afghanistan descends into civil war. Iran also had long-term ambitions for Afghanistan. You mentioned Chabahar. I mean, Chabahar is a project that has been going on for a long time, going back to the early 1990s. We're essentially, to tell the story short, it's a deep sea port on Iran's Gulf of Oman coast that is closest to Afghanistan, which bypasses Pakistan, which is why Chabahar was so attractive for the Indians. The Indians want to be a very close trading partner with Afghanistan, also because they want to have a political influence in that country as part of Indian-Pakistani rivalry, as we all know. And India was chosen by the Iranians as a major foreign partner in the development of Chabahar. And the Indians have been very interested. They have invested, but then the American sanctions has slowed things down, so much so that Chabahar essentially hasn't become what had been hoped. So, it's a long-term project. Chabahar was supposed to connect India to Afghanistan through Iran and then go onwards and connect to the rest of Central Asia, to places like Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. What happens to it remains to be seen. Right now, India is probably the biggest loser of events in Afghanistan as of now, geopolitical loser. It's hard to see how they can remain on the ground in a significant way. And I know Taliban are saying that they do want to have relations with India, but Taliban essentially has to choose Pakistan over India, I think. And that's, but so the issue of long-term economic projects has been a factor in Iranian calculations. But Alex, and I'll stop here, end of the day, Iran's foreign policy overall, and we can debate why that is, why they choose the foreign policy they choose, but in essence, what they have done is they have isolated themselves. The nuclear program is one aspect of it. Controversial Iranian interventions in the region is another aspect of it. And all these things has resulted in the sanctions regime being on Iran, which has made it impossible for countries and companies that do want to deal with Iran, that do consider Iran a very possibly lucrative market, that they are in a wait and see position, waiting for the moment Iran becomes normal again so they can go in. So the Indians can go into Chabahar. I mean, I give you an example. One of the last times I read about Chabahar was the Indians couldn't get big cranes sent to Chabahar because the types of cranes that they needed required very large vessels. And because Iran is under sanctions, shipping companies refused to go to Chabahar because they feared the Americans will penalize them. And this is despite the fact that Washington has given India an exemption from the sanctions for Chabahar specifically. So again, so much of this in terms of Iran's ability to become the economic powerhouse it could become is linked to one issue, where it can resolve its differences with the West, with the United States in particular. If it can, Iran has huge amounts of potential for itself, and it could become a hub for the rest of the region. Its economy probably could be one of the top 20 economies in the world if it was allowed to be a normal economy. But unfortunately, it's not, because it's taken hostage by an Iranian revolutionary foreign policy that scares investors and prevents Iran from having a normal economy.
Thank you, Alex. You mentioned so many times the sanctions and the nuclear deal, the discussions over the nuclear deal. I cannot miss this opportunity to put the question. I saw today the news that the U.S. Special Representative in the talks is traveling to Moscow and Paris to discuss the possibility of restarting next round of negotiations with Iranian side, and also the concerning news regarding the special watchdog agencies, IAEA's rejection of accepting them to the nuclear facilities by the Iranian government. Having in mind the hardliners, new president and the new leadership in Afghanistan, in Iran, do you foresee any chances for the compromise found between the United States and Iran in the discussions over the nuclear deal and rejoining United States? Biden's administration certainly needs some good diplomatic victories in nearest future. So, but it is also the dangerous field to agree to the conditions of the Iranian government. So, should we expect that there will be, at the end of the day, at the end of the year, or in the nearest future, the agreement between the sides and U.S. could join back to the nuclear deal?
Yeah. No, Alex, that's an excellent question. I would start off by saying the following first, because I think it's so important. The new Iranian president, Ebrahim Raisi, has this job because Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, wanted him to have this job. Ebrahim Raisi would have never been president, probably wouldn't have been elected to a single seat in the Majlis on his own. He owes everything, absolutely everything to Khamenei, and he will do absolutely everything Khamenei tells him to do. There will be zero, and I repeat, zero policy independence on the part of Ebrahim Raisi. So I think it's extremely important to remember that, because what that tells us is expect policy continuity on the nuclear issue. And what does policy continuity mean? It means over a decade ago, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei sent secretly an envoy or a group of diplomats to the country of Oman during the Obama administration, and they began talking to the Americans quietly. Even the Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad had no idea those talks were going on. Ali Khamenei needs and wants a diplomatic end to the nuclear file. He does not want war. He does not want sanctions forever. So right now where we are at is both sides are engaging in a diplomatic tango. Both sides want to get the best, strongest hand before they enter the room to play the game of negotiations. The Americans want to go back to 2015 and pretty much reactivate what was agreed in 2015. The Iranians are saying, you have to give us two things more than 2015. One is you have to give us promises that you're not going to walk away from the next nuclear deal the way Trump walked away from the last one in 2018. Right? You got to make us a promise that this isn't something the next American president can undo. The other thing the Iranians want, which is very tough, is comprehensive and verifiable sanctions relief. The Americans are saying, we will only lift sanctions that are linked to the 2015 agreement. For example, you will be able to sell your oil and get paid for it. The Iranians are saying, prove it. Because last time we had a deal with you, you lifted the sanctions in name, but in reality, you were telling banks and everybody else out there in the world quietly, still don't deal with Iran. How do you prove, how do you get to an agreement what verifiable sanctions relief will look like? That's a tough one. At the end of the day, what this is all about is the Iranians want to just have a deal over their nuclear program. That's all they want to do. And they fear the Americans want to broaden the conversation to talk about things like Iran's missile program, what Iran does in the region, that they want to push Iran in terms of the domestic situation maybe. And they don't want to go there because they think that would be an endless list of American demands. And if they go down that path, by the time they're done satisfying American demands, there will be no Islamic Republic left. I think soon enough, if I was a gambling man, I think soon enough, and I think Rob Malley's visit to Paris and Moscow is part of this, there will be a resumption of talks in Vienna. I think the Iranians can continue to rely on Russian and Chinese support in these Vienna talks. And I think the question, again, becomes how do you hammer out, and it won't be a maximum deal. It's the bare minimum. What will bare minimum agreement look like going forward? And I think that is how I foresee events to unfold. I do think they will return to Vienna. This tango is not, this political posturing can't last forever. You also, Alex, mentioned the IAEA. They have a meeting in a week's time or so of the directors. I'm not sure how much IAEA, how relevant it is now. It's in the news certainly today, yesterday. They're concerned that some of the equipment in place to monitor Iran's nuclear program have been taken away or not in operation. They don't have access to the information. Now, I'm sure that is true. But from Iran's perspective, the worst the IAEA can do as a monitoring and advisory agency is to send Iran's file to the United Nations Security Council. There, the Russian-Chinese position presumably is to support Iran, at least for now, by not voting for any more sanctions on Iran. But even if the Russians and Chinese voted for more sanctions on Iran, the American unilateral sanctions policy has been so comprehensive and devastating that there isn't really anything else you can sanction. So from that perspective, I think the Iranians are gambling. They have nothing to lose. They have been sanctioned all the way. There is nothing, even the United Nations Security Council, even if the Russians or Chinese came on board, can sanction that would make much of a difference to their economy. So, but at the end of the day, I assume Khamenei, he's 82 now. And if he wants to give the succession process a chance to unfold in an orderly fashion, he needs to create stability, at least provide a bit more stability in the Iranian economy. And you can only do that right now by finding a way to ease off on the sanctions. And that means you need to cut some kind of a deal with the West, with the United States in Vienna. If that happened, Khamenei can worry more about who's going to follow him as the next supreme leader of Iran, because he really is concerned about the succession process. He wants to make sure that it works out the way he wants it and engineers it to work out. The way he brought Raisi as president, he wants his next successor to be the next supreme leader to have the space, to have the calm, as I said, to be able to continue what Khamenei believes should be the legacy of the Islamic Republic.
Based on what you said, should we expect that Raisi could be the successor of the Khamenei?
Yes, I mean, Raisi is definitely on the short list. He would be by far the weakest of the three supreme leaders. I mean, they've had two supreme leaders now, Ayatollah Khomeini from 79 to 89, and Ayatollah Khamenei from 89 to today. Raisi would be by far the weakest, politically, religious credential-wise. He would be, again, beholden to various interest groups in the regime. The Revolutionary Guards could play a bigger role going forward. They already do. I mean, Raisi's cabinet today is full of people with connections to the Revolutionary Guard. So yes, he could be the next supreme leader, which means his job is really going to be, balancing the various interests within the hardline part of the regime that is now in full control of the Islamic Republic.
Very, very last question. More you speak, I have more questions, but we have a question here. Here is certain sympathy towards Ahmad Massoud, son of Ahmad Shah Massoud. So there is a question from Rostam Lejava that how do you think, what is the future of the son of Ahmad Shah Massoud? What is his chances to lead and to have a success in his resistance fight?
Well, to be honest, I don't follow the man. I would be speculating wildly, and I don't like to do that. But I can tell you, as an observer of the big picture situation in Afghanistan, if what he's saying, if what Ahmad Massoud is saying is true, that the Pakistanis have taken the gloves off, they are so confident now that they even have their head of their spy agency show up and make a visit, and they're supporting the Taliban militarily all the way. If that is true, then his survival will depend on whether he can recruit support by other outside powers, countries like Iran, Russia, India. That's the only way I assume he can last going forward. I think Panjshir Valley has about 200 or so villages, something along those lines. I'm not exactly sure. But, it will be a question of time before Taliban would be able to conquer that part of Afghanistan. And that would be the end of Panjshir. But as I said, if he can recruit, if he can get support from the outside powers, if we go in the direction of civil war, and enough Afghans, and he's clearly appealing to Afghan nationalism. I mean, if you follow the man on social media, he's saying he's the last man between the dark Stone Age that Taliban is about to bring back and freedom, and Afghanistan can look forward to future. Maybe he can get enough Afghans to join him. I don't know, but it can't just be limited to Panjshir. It can't be limited just to him and his followers. It has to broaden, and I assume it has to be able to get the support of foreign actors who come in and help him the way they helped his father, Ahmad Shah Massoud. He wouldn't have lasted as long as he did without outside. So time will show. Again, maybe I could leave on a hopeful note. Maybe this Taliban would recognize the fact that Afghan society today is very different from 25 years ago when they took Kabul in '96. That you just cannot ignore 50% of the population that are women, the minorities, the people who are educated, can read and write, know what the rest of the world is all about. This is a very different Afghanistan, and they can't play the same game again. Maybe, let's hope Taliban will get to that conclusion and you can have something that looks like an inclusive government. But I didn't want to do this, and here I am. And I haven't seen any signs from this Taliban so far to suggest.
Unfortunately. Alex, thank you very much. We really had a wonderful conversation, and I could put the questions more and more, but we have already overcome our limits of all our time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex.
I hope that we will have a chance in future to organize and to have the discussions in a wider format, maybe or again inviting you and discuss, because I believe that Afghanistan will be on our minds for long, and we will be hearing news from Afghanistan, maybe bad news. Hopefully, inshallah, good news. But I don't know. I'm also realistic like you, and I do not have too much optimism towards the new Taliban rulership. We'll see. They are in control, but will they govern the country? That's two different things. So we will see. We will follow. And once again, thank you very much, Alex, and I look forward to hearing from you again.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and I really look forward to coming back to beautiful Tbilisi. And it's been too long, but thanks again. It's great as always to be with you, and thanks for everyone who watched and for the questions. And until next time.
All the best and welcome to Georgia. Always. Thank you. Thank you very much.